What is up, guys? So I wanted to talk about something that has been happening in the Arrowverse recently, basically in the last seasons of each of the Arrowverse shows. In the last 2 seasons of Arrow, there has been a villain swap, and I don't know why it's happening, but I will go over why I think it is happening and why they are continuing to do these villain swaps. If you don't know, it started basically in Arrow Season 6, when for the first 15 episodes, Caden James was the main villain, and there was really no doubt that he was the main villain, except for, like, in behind the scenes, people said that Ricardo Diaz was the main villain, so it was weird that Caden James was the villain for so many episodes, but then Ricardo Diaz finally took over in episode, I think it was 15, when he killed Caden James. So that was the first Arrow villain swap. There's never been one before where there wasn't a clear villain, and then there was a clear villain, and then he was replaced by another one. It's always been a clear villain like Malcolm Merlin, Slade Wilson, Rachel Gold, Damian Dark, Adrian Chase, but then for Season 6, there wasn't a clear villain. There was Caden James, and he was replaced by Ricardo Diaz, and Supergirl's also done it before, like in Season 1 with Astra, was the main villain, then she was replaced with None, and then in Season 2, the main villain didn't show up until episode 15, and there was kind of, like, Cadmus and Lillian Luthor kind of was the main villain, but that was a lot less noticeable than the Ricardo Diaz, Caden James thing. But now, this year of the Arrowverse, 3 out of 4 of the shows so far have had a villain swap, those villain swaps being on Arrow Season 7. For the first 7 episodes, Ricardo Diaz continued to be the main villain until he was defeated by Oliver Queen, and Oliver was released from prison. And then there was a number of episodes that there wasn't really any main villain at all, though in the background it was pretty clear that the Ninth Circle were becoming the main villains, and then Dante was revealed as the main villain. But then something happened in episode 17 where it was revealed that Emiko Queen, aka, not yet, but probably going to be called the Red Arrow, is actually the head of the Ninth Circle, meaning not Dante's boss, meaning she's actually the main villain of the season. So there were kind of 2 villain swaps in Arrow Season 7. For the Flash Season 5, Cicada was clearly the main villain. Cicada, aka Orland Dwyer, was the main villain of the season for 16 episodes until he agreed to take the cure that Team Flash developed, and he was cured of his metahuman powers. And then his niece/adopted daughter from the future, Grace Gibbons, took over as the Cicada version 2, as I like to call her, as the main villain of the season. And I think that actually the best season so far of the Arrowverse that did a villain swap is actually Supergirl Season 4, where it was pretty clear that Agent Liberty was going to be the main villain, or before the season started, Red Daughter seemed to be the main villain, but then Agent Liberty was the main villain. But now it's pretty clear that Lex Luthor was behind everything, and he is the main villain of the season. And I think all 3 of these seasons did a much better job at setting up these main villains than, say, Arrow Season 6, because all 3 of them were set up from before they debuted, and they had significant roles, except for Lex Luthor, but he was revealed to be, like, behind everything, and he's such a great character, even in just the, like, 2 episodes we've seen him already, that it's a little bit different. But for Emiko and Grace, they were both definitely set up from the very beginning. Grace was a part of Cicada's origin story. Emiko appeared in the first episode, and she has close ties to Green Arrow and the Ninth Circle. So I do think that the villain swaps this season were so much better than last season, or I guess for Arrow Season 6, but the question does arise, why are all these villain swaps happening? Why all of a sudden did 3 out of the 4 Arrowverse shows decide that they are going to go away from what they've been doing for the past couple of years? Maybe not Supergirl, because for the first 2 seasons they did kind of have villain swaps, but Supergirl didn't really become part of the Arrowverse, so didn't really become part of the same formulaic style of the Arrowverse until Season 3, so how come Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl all of a sudden decided to all do villain swaps? And who knows, maybe Legends of Tomorrow Season 4 will also have a villain swap. We don't really have enough episodes to see, but I don't think they will. I think Neuron will definitely be the main villain of the season for the entirety of the season. But how come Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl all decided to do villain swaps this year? I think that the answer is actually pretty simple, a lot more simple than you would expect, and that is they kind of wanted to deviate from the formulaic style of the Arrowverse. Basically every season of the Arrowverse up until Arrow Season 6 and like the first 2 seasons of Supergirl, I've seen a lot of articles showing I haven't actually read them, but the headline is that Arrow or the Flash or the Arrowverse needs to get rid of its main villain trope or the main villain formula, which is that they introduce this main villain at the beginning of the season that defeats the hero most of the time, but then the hero gets the upper hand in the end and defeats them. It's typically very predictable, or it is predictable with bad writing. I think that this is a trope or formula that is kind of genius if it works. If they have good writing, it works so incredibly well, and it's so satisfying for the season to watch the hero be defeated in the beginning and then at the end win for the most part, or maybe they do something different where, like in Arrow Season 5, where the hero doesn't really win in the end, but the villain still dies. I don't think this is really a formula that has any problems. I think it works so well. I mean, it worked for the Flash Season 1, for the Flash Season 2. I think it worked for the Flash Season 3 and 4 as well. It's just that the actual villains for those seasons weren't as good as the first two seasons, but the problem there was not the villain formula. The problem was the actual villains and the way they used the villain formula in that context, and the same goes for Arrow. The first two seasons of Season 5 definitely used the main villain formula very, very well. I mean, the first two seasons invented it kind of for the Arrowverse, and it worked. Everybody loved it, and again, I don't think the formula is the problem. I think that people just get annoyed when they use the formula incorrectly, and I understand that. Like this season of The Flash, they had this one villain who was the villain for 16 episodes, and they used the main villain formula so incredibly poorly in those 16 episodes when Cicada was mostly outmatched by Team Flash. He was mostly defeated by Team Flash. Like I said earlier, it's more of the formula works where the Flash, or not the Flash, the hero is defeated by the main villain and is overpowered by the main villain until right at the end when they get the upper hand, or they can outsmart them in some way, or at least get equal footing with them. That's how the main villain formula typically works, but recently in the Arrowverse, they have kind of been deviating from that, and people might not notice that and think that the formula is the problem when I don't really think it is. So to answer the question, why are the Arrowverse seasons deviating from the main villain formula, and that is because there has been a little bit of backlash with the formulaic style of the Arrowverse, and they wanted to change that with a less predictable storyline and a less predictable season, where it turns out that the villain that's been set up for a couple episodes, or maybe there is no clear villain in the end, another villain replaces them, or another villain is revealed to be behind everything, and they are doing that in the Arrowverse this season. I think it worked for Supergirl Season 4. I think it kind of worked for Arrow Season 7 and The Flash Season 5. I mean, I don't know, the seasons haven't ended yet, but I can definitely not see Emiko or Cicada being these crazy great villains in the end with a great rivalry with the main hero, and that's partially due to the fact that they are going to have such a limited amount of episodes where they are going to face off with the main villain. The same thing was for Ricardo Diaz. They kind of faced off against each other once or twice before he became the main villain, but after that there were 2 episodes where they didn't actually see each other, and then there were like maybe 5-6 episodes where they had to kind of manufacture this rivalry. And just looking at the Season 7 as well, the actual rivalry didn't actually become good until the last episode that they fought, which was in Season 7, Episode 7, where that episode had a great rivalry between Oliver and Diaz, but it was way too late, especially for Season 6, and that's just because the rivalry kind of has to build throughout the season. That works for every good villain of the Arrowverse. The rivalry between the main hero and the main villain, it's always the best part, the most important part for me for a main villain, that rivalry. So when there's such a limited amount of episodes between the hero and the villain, that rivalry doesn't really have enough time to be created, and that's why I don't really see Emiko or Cicada V2 being these incredible main villains by the end of these seasons. For Lex Luthor, the acting from Jon Cryer and the fact that he is Lex Luthor, the most famous, or should I say infamous, villain of all time, right next to the Joker, is definitely a part of why he is kind of an exception, and he will definitely end up being a great villain. So with that in mind, how do we deal with this main villain formula problem? The problem that people seem to be getting a little bit annoyed with this predictable and kind of repetitive formula that, again, I don't really have a problem with, but I think my main problem with the formula, if there was one, was not the formula, but the number of episodes they have to fill. Each season had 23 episodes, but now they all have 22, which is way too many episodes to have this one villain be the villain or the threat for all of those episodes. The solutions they've had, there are 3 of them. One, the villain swap, which is what I'm going over here, and then there's also the one which they just introduced the character very late in the season, like episode 15 or maybe episode 9 for like Deathstroke, and then I think the best way to go about it, which is masking the villain for like 10, maybe like 12, 15 episodes, and then unmasking him or her, and then that last couple episodes, it is the same villain, but it also feels like a little bit different of a villain. Examples of this are Zoom, where he was introduced, and he was this very scary, very, very dark villain and version of Flash that was masked. Then you have this mystery of who he is, and he's unmasked, and then when he is wearing his mask, he kind of feels like a different villain from Hunter Zolomon, the unmasked version of the character that we see. Another great version of this, or another great example of this is Prometheus in Arrow Season 5, where he was masked for the majority of the season, but when he was unmasked, he feels like a slightly different villain, because he kind of acts a little bit different and he just doesn't look the same. And I think that is definitely the best way to go around the problem of the villain formula, which I don't think the problem is the villain formula. I think the problem is the number of episodes they have to fill. For Zoom, for Prometheus, they did the mask thing. For Deathstroke and for Malcolm Merlin, they introduced them in like the mid-season finale. And like for Reverse Flash, they also kind of did the mask thing, but also introduced him in the mid-season finale as Reverse Flash. So all the good villains don't really appear in every single episode of the season, and they have a way to get around the 23 episodes they have to fill, and I don't think the villain swap is the way to go about it. And so far, the only time that it has worked, as far as I can see right now, is with Lex Luthor. But again, the seasons have not ended, so any of them could go any way. We don't know. So anyway, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think the villain swaps are a good idea, or do you think the masking of the villain or the introducing the villain in like episode 9 of a season, which one of those versions of getting over the fact that they have to go over 23 episodes do you think is the best way to go about it? Do you think the main villain formula is actually a problem? And let me know your thoughts. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Everything to do with the villain swaps, the masking of a villain, or introducing them very late in the season. Which one do you think is the best way to go about going over the 23 episodes they have to be the villain of? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.